Good evening. The November 7th special city council meeting will come to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Mayor Viss.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nieuwsma.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Suffredin. Councilmember Ravel. Here. Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Councilmember Heracariz.
Here.
We have a quorum present and are prepared to do our work. I wanted to give just a little roadmap of the evening ahead of us. We'll begin with regular public comment for the council meeting itself. When that concludes, we will move to the Truth in Taxation hearing, which will be, we'll have more people speaking than in the traditional public comment. Then we'll move on to special orders of business. When we get to that stage of the agenda, what I would propose and request is that we initially not have any motions made on these items, that we have a discussion where members of council have the opportunity to ask questions and give guidance and hear from staff. At the conclusion of that, what I would request is that we have a motion to table all of these special orders of business for 1 week, so they would appear on the November 14th agenda. The reason for that is that the items here that are ordinances that are on the agenda for introduction, if they were to pass tonight, they would then appear on the agenda next week for action. The intention, as articulated in the calendar that was first released, I think a couple months ago now, was for the budget not to be passed until November 21st. And so passing these tonight would put us on an accelerated calendar that I would prefer that we avoid. So again, we'll go right now to public comment, then we'll have the Truth in Taxation hearing, then a discussion about the special orders of business, and then I would request a motion to table the special orders of business for 1 week. With that, we go to public comment, beginning with those who signed up in person. Everyone will this evening have 3 minutes. We start with Mike Vasilko.
Just point, I'm sorry, a bit for the roadmap. So this public comment is separate of the Truth and Taxation hearing, which will then be a separate public comment period.
It'll be a Truth and Taxation hearing that may have a lot in common with how public comment goes. It'll be an opportunity for the public to weigh in. In fact, some people will participate both in the Truth and Taxation hearing and public comment. Others will participate in just one or the other as they've indicated their preference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So many of you have young children or grandchildren. I'm sure you cherish them. So I ask, why would we leave them a world, why would we leave behind a world that they'll experience as a new kind of hell on earth? The headline from the UN Climate Action Conference is that the air quality is sinking as climate change accelerates. So it's expanding much faster than they thought it would be, despite some action, but it's expanding because there's been limited action, a path that Evanston is following. You must be aware of the forest fires if you watch any of the news or read papers or listen to the radio. Forest fires, Amazon's rainforest is being commercialized, melting of both ice caps, rising ocean levels, swallowing up island nations, tsunamis, drought, flooding, longer hurricane seasons, etc., all catastrophic weather events. But in Evanston, we're fortunate. We're kind of in that sweet spot in between all of that. We're not really impacted, so why do we care? Well, our lake level is rising, and our lake edge erosion is occurring because of that rising and because of lake action. So far, we've escaped the most, but we are contributing to the cause, to the climate problem. Our pollution rises and adds to all the other locations where pollution is a problem. So we should care. And we need to do more than we're doing. It's that simple. I've spoken on this before. I'm asking somebody on the council to take the lead and move to add a new fund, different from the CARP fund. The CARP fund is a pilot program, basically $1 million going in 2023, $100,000 of which is being given to a for-profit contractor, by the way. But it's lucky, I suppose, to help maybe 50 households in Evanston. The proposal I've been advocating for would help eliminate either fossil fuel burning in homes for heat, or would allow residents of Evanston to help towards the purchase of an electric vehicle in lieu of a combustion engine. Fossil fuels is the core of the problem. If you eliminate the fossil fuels, you're eliminating
15
the
seconds.
problem. So I'm looking for somebody to stand up and do the right thing. This fund needs tens of millions of dollars to support 1,000 households. I'm turning to Mayor Biss to help lead Evanston's action plan going forward.
Time.
Apologies to Councilmember Nwisma, but you lost my confidence this last weekend in your response to my email pleading to you to do something about this and start a fund.
Thank you very much.
Can I add just one more thing? I want to share the good news. So a 30-year veteran who has been following this and participating in these climate actions has a quote. He says, I can't say I'm optimistic. The human race is not going to be wiped out, but there's going to be displacement, movement of people on a historic scale. There will be more and more displacement. That's what we have to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. We can take that time from your truth and taxation comment. The next speaker is Ray Friedman.
I thought we were going to end on a good note with that last one. That didn't seem like a good note.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank you for hosting the Truth and Taxation hearing. I'd like to ask you all first, what's the difference between a public hearing and public comment? It seems you treat them both the same, which is very confusing and frustrating for the residents who are looking for answers, some discussion, a dialogue as presented in all council agendas. That's what we're supposed to be having, a dialogue. 2 weeks ago on 10/24, we were supposed to have a budget hearing posted in Chicago Tribune to start at 6. It did not, with no explanation and no apology. It was not even listed on the city calendar, and no sign-up sheet for this so-called budget hearing. There was a request by 3 council members to have the budget hearing continued. Thanks, council members Kelly, Burns, and Reed. When and where will this continued budget hearing take place? We are continuously told there's plenty of time and plenty of opportunities of public input. That's great, but we need some feedback from all council members. We need that dialogue as stated in every city council agenda. Please have all ward meetings recorded, and please stop having multiple ward or city meetings on the same night. You're keeping residents out of the discussions and out of the process. It's not a good look for the city, especially when you're promoting transparency and accountability. I'm thinking that increasing the budget between last year and next year by $107 million is extreme. That's a 25% increase in the budget from 2021 to 2023. Do we have a projected 25% increase in our 2023 income? If we do, then we need to be contributing more to pensions, climate change, like Mike just said, and reducing our property taxes, not raising our property taxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the people who signed in person to speak for a regular public comment. Others signed up in person to speak in the Truth and Taxation hearing, which will happen soon. But we first move to the online public comment participants. We will begin with Mary Rosinski, who will be followed by Dorian Price.
Hi, thank you very much for public comment. And I have, my big question is this meeting, I thought the Truth and Taxation hearing was starting at 6:30. And I think that if we are going to have hearings, which are really quite important, that we just budget our time correctly so that it starts, so that people who want to attend can be there. We're already going to be at 7:30 and it won't be 8:30 until then. And people have other things they need to do. So in the future, like Ray was saying, can we please try to be respectful of everyone's time when it comes to what meetings start at what time? I mean, so much of my comment that I wanted to speak on did relate to the truth in taxation, but it was also more important to me that the budget be correct and before we present it for any sort of hearing, and there's mistakes in the budget that need to be rectified. So I'm going to try to stay around. I have a Zoom meeting for business that's supposed to start at 8, so I may not be around. But there were a lot of things. We have to pay off our pensions so that we don't have ongoing debt. We just keep paying interest on top of interest. Everything in the Civic Center should be taken out of the budget. We don't have the backup documentation. The windows are not broken, as Ms. Biggs said last week, but rather the caulking behind the windows needs to be done. So and that's a $5 million right off the bat for the Civic Center that needs to be brought in, get backup estimates for what needs to be done. We've already spent, I think, $600,000 in tuck pointing. So who's ever doing our tuck pointing ordinarily would look at the overall project. So these are all things that go day in and day out, year in and year out. And we have no way as a resident where we can look at our city website and say, okay, in 2020, we did this. In 2021, we did this. We took out a bond for $10 million, and this is how much we've spent. So I would really ask that we come up with a way to make how our expenditures are happening in this town easy enough that someone could pick it up. That's all I think I want to say for now, but thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Dorian Price.
Hi, Mayor Biss and City Council. Also, Mayor Rosinski, thank you for speaking. Both of us, I believe, would be speaking today and what the upcoming meeting because we both thought we were going to be attending both. So I applied for both when I found out about it right after I applied before the council meeting to make sure I could do both. So I don't know what other approach will work, but please include me for both comments, for both days, and others. So my comment is, please extend the budget discussions beyond tonight, thinking that this was the same night for both, to create budgets and policies that unite with compassion and prosperity for all. How can residents not feel ignored or excluded when old processes or biases prevail? What if increased inclusion starting now saves far more than the current budget proposal, enhances our diversity and affordability, well-being with sustainable prosperity for all? To challenge assumptions that got us here, pre and post COVID-19 with federal rescue funds, the ARPA money that some people might not realize, extending the budget discussions beyond tonight could also make a huge differences in Evanston and nearby communities who partner with us. Let's not forget about them and our ability to do what we can on our end as well. They're doing their best to help us as well, and not being a burden to them is not a good thing, right? I mean, it is a good thing not to be a burden to our communities that we depend upon. How else can we synergize and we're synergizing with these communities, synergize and create procedures, policies, and budgets reflecting unity, compassion, and real prosperity for all, morally, ethically, and legally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes public comment for the evening. We move now to the next item on our agenda, the Truth in Taxation hearing. The Evanston City Council is conducting a public hearing on the 2022 property tax levy. The purpose of this hearing is to allow for public input on the proposed levy. There will be no final action on the tax levy today. The 2022 proposed tax levy was included in the 2022 proposed budget and can be found at www.cityofevanston.org/budget. I hereby convene the hearing for the 2022 property tax levy to be open. We begin with a comment from the community. We'll start as per usual with those who signed up here in person. Much like the previous set of comments, everyone will be given 3 minutes. We start with Mike Vasilko.
Thank you. So at the town hall meeting last week, Hitesh, our CFO, presented the funding for the pension debt as we are in good shape, better than most. At the same time, there was a first ward meeting going on where I tried to listen to what the police and fire department pension experts were saying, and they concluded the polar opposite of what Hitesh says. So clearly, just looking at it from layman's terms, fully funding the pension obligation only helps Evanston by creating far less debt. So I encourage you to fully fund the pension obligation. We don't need liars working for Evanston. Our CFO, again, all last week, and specifically at the town hall, was repeatedly asked about 2022 GO bonds. Hitesh repeatedly said there are no 2022 GO bonds, yet tonight's packet has reference throughout about projects being funded by 2022 GO bonds. Laura Biggs, memos to the council, and others also refer to funding using 2022 GO bonds. So it's frustrating that Hitesh continues the Bobkowitz fashion of lying to the public, lying to the council, and to say that there are no 2022 GO bonds may be fine, but then you don't come forward with a packet that presents CIP projects using 2022 GO bonds. It just doesn't make sense. It's disingenuous. It's a falsehood. It's a lie. Trust in the CFO, as far as I'm concerned, is non-existent. Where are and how are the 2021-2022 surpluses being used? There's $14 million reported to be for 2022 so far, I think as of September, $76 million from 2021. There was a list of all the 2021 funds showing what the surplus is. It doesn't tell us how that's being used. So what's aggravating is that we can fund the pensions, we could fund real climate action with those surpluses and many other things without raising taxes. And, I'm just tired of the lies. I'm tired of being running around in circles trying to figure all this out the day before a meeting. So at the expense of fully funding the pensions and fully funding climate
15
action.
seconds.
We don't need $110,000 for a consultant for a dog beach. We need a location, a wire fence, and a gate. We should only fund urgent park repairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Timothy Schoolmaster.
Good evening, Mayor Biss, Manager Stowe, members of the council, members of the rest of the world. I'm Timothy Schoolmaster. I'm president of the Board of Trustees of the Evanston Police Pension Fund. This morning, I sent you under separate cover 4 documents and the tax levy request from the Police Pension Fund as required by statute. Clerk Mendoza tells me those have been distributed. The financial reports that we have, unfortunately, are 1 year in arrears. This report was probably the rosiest report you're going to see. In a number of coming years, we had extraordinary 3-year financial gains, and next year, when we see this year's numbers, and we already know some of them, what they're going to be, the picture will not be this rosy. And that's why I implore you to use some of these reserves to catch up while we can. Also, during that same period, over 10% of the police department has left. They have not left policing. They have left Evanston policing. They have gone, these are mid-career, excellent people who would be our future supervisors. They've gone elsewhere. If you don't know the reasons why they left, maybe you should inquire. On November 1st, I did a trial run at the request for a ward meeting. I did a presentation on the history and the situation with the pension funds, and I don't like to toot my own horn, but people said it was well received. They said, I begin to understand some of this. And so I have asked that I could do that presentation next week. I wait to hear from you. If you have any questions, you can reach me at extension 5049 almost any time. I hope we can break the mold that we have been consistently shortchanging both police and fire funds this year going forward. This is, we're asking for 100% funding. With so many members of the council new in your responsibilities and not knowing how these things work, and so many of the taxpayers not being knowledgeable about the extra burden they are shouldering because of prior council's failure to act on these things, I think this would be a worthwhile presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jack Mortel.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. The basis of my name is Jack Mortel. I'm a lifelong resident. I've been a tax-paying homeowner since the 70s. I'm a retired captain from the Evanston Fire Department, and I'm an elected member of the Evanston Firefighters Pension Fund. I represent the retired, the disabled, and the widows. And I want to address the historic underfunding of the pension fund and urge you that the tax levy investment return assumption for this year, don't adopt 6.5, adopt 6.25 as recommended by the actuarial. Using the numbers that I took right off the website, and I applaud the website. You can find all sorts of great information on there. I did going back from 2012, when we switched to a January to January budget, through 2020. And I looked at the approved budget versus what the actual was. It takes a year or so to see what the actual is. And then I wrote down the difference. It's pretty simple math. And in that period, the fire pension fund was underfunded by $3 million. Right there. You wonder how we get in these situations. And that's because they were using this 6.5. If they used the 6.25, we'd have actually been gaining. But this is penny wise and really pound foolish. And so again, I want to urge, so what happens when you're over $3 million in budget, it doesn't come from the general fund, it doesn't come from some other secret fund, you cannibalize the pension fund. So in that period, independent of investments, we lost $3 million. And that's going to continue on that course if we continue to use 6.5 instead of the 6.25. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Biss and members of the council. I was asked to take a look at the budget by some citizens, and at the risk of being triggered, I did so. Preliminarily, I don't think that a hearing should have 3-minute time limits. If it's in the spirit, even if we're not sworn of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, the 3 minutes can only be a general statement of opinion. I'll try and hit a couple of specifics. I think the budget still has too many areas of vagueness and unsupported assumptions. It's really impossible for the average citizen, and I think probably most council people to scrutinize because it has too many large numbers without backup or detail. It also represents a problematic increase in spending without an attendant increase in offsetting revenue. Spending is accomplished at a net loss for all the funds mentioned using one-time monies, whether they're ARPA funds or surpluses, but committing to repeating expenses for the future. This means you'll necessarily have revenue increases later, which we don't want to do. Committing to raising taxes, fines, or fees in the future at a time when any Evanstonian with a 401k or IRA has seen that plunge by 20% in the last year, while their personal costs of living have increased, seems a little tone deaf. Easy targets for reduction or elimination are the millions of dollars in quote, other improvements stated for TIF districts without any backup or detail. We're talking millions of dollars, $6 million for 2 TIF districts alone, with one line, with no explanation, no backup, no detail. This is a recipe for bad government. The capital budget represents additional borrowing at a time when we're seeing the highest interest rates in years, when debt service already equals 22% of general fund expenditures. I would hold off on that, just as any business or household would, until we can see interest rates come down a little bit. In particular, $2.4 million in Fountain Square improvements seems like throwing good money after bad when we've seen no consequences for the mismanagement of that expensive and unsightly project, instead of giving those responsible millions more in public funds to squander. There's very little data on utilization metrics, return on investment, or bang for the buck in the budget. I applaud and some of the efforts of some departments, some of the information provided by the fire department on EMS use and is valuable and helpful for somebody who's trying to take this seriously. You might disagree, but at least with some of the numbers, but at least you can take a look at them. I do believe that there's some institutionalized overspending. When we're talking about pensions, and we have not been responsible in funding those, but we have to take pensions into consideration when we're making spending commitments now, because it all adds up in the future. Okay, so please think of the people first, so that we don't have to put a subtitle under the budget every year called "This is why we can't have nice things." Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Leslie McMillan.
Thank you, Mayor Biss and council members. I am a 30-year resident of Evanston and also on the Finance and Budget Committee. I was heartened and happy to hear that you aren't doing any voting on the budget, because the committee is still awaiting information from Hitesh. I know David Livingston's given a couple repeated requests for information that I hope we can see before you move forward on this. I would just say, I was happy to hear that some members of council are not interested in raising the levy, but at the same time, I worry that we're playing a dangerous shell game. If we continue to not do the hard work of actually cutting spending and addressing our pensions, all we're going to do is inflate our debt, as well as inflating and having increasing rises in the pension. And the outcome for that will be, I'm sure, a drop in our credit rating at some point. So, I would really encourage you to shrink your balance sheet, take a red pen to a lot of these projects, and act responsible and do the hard work that we're hoping that you'll do. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ray Friedman.
Good evening once again. First, I'd like to say that the budget hearing budget hearing should be a discussion. I think any of the hearings should be a discussion, so that the residents know and able to have their questions asked and answered at that point in time. We should have started the budget discussion, I believe, in June or July. And all the residents should be clear on the budget before it's presented to City Council. I've been here for 6 years now. I wanted to make some observations that I've seen. First, I'd like to thank Councilmember Kelly and Ward Wonderful for staying engaged, working with residents, and having great ward meetings. Next, thank you to our second ward council member, Chrissy Harris, for our first second ward meeting at Robert Crown. It was awesome, but can we please record them? I'm sorry to say that I've not been to a third ward meeting with Melissa Wynn. I hope she's feeling better. Jonathan said she had minor surgery. Thanks to Jonathan Newsma for your informative ward meetings at Robert Crown, and thanks to Dan Coyne for recording them. Next, I always try to attend the Fifth Ward meetings. Thanks to Bobby Burns for hosting them. I also remember attending a couple of great Robin Rue Simmons Christmas/Hanukkah parties. Great food at Gibbs Morrison, great decorations, complete with Santa and gifts for all, and many of those ward meetings were recorded. I believe I only attended one Sixth Ward meeting, joint meeting with Councilmember Revelle a couple of years ago to talk about the budget. Also, thank you to Councilmember Revelle for very informative meetings at the Ecology Center, and I believe all of your meetings were recorded also. Thanks for that. One of the first experiences I had after moving to Evanston 6 years ago was with Devon Reed, who was extremely helpful with paperwork as city clerk and always engaged. And now, sorry that I can't join any of your ward meetings because there's 2, 3, or 4 meetings, Evanston meetings, ward meetings on the same night. Can you please help correct this problem? And
15
can we
seconds.
not have multiple city meetings on the same night? Lastly, 9th Ward meeting with Juan. Thank you. With Juan. Can't pronounce the last name. Congratulations on your new position and hope to join your ward meetings also. I believe you do have them recorded in both English and Spanish, and thank you for that. That
very much.
concludes my thanks, okay, to all wards, except to say one council member asked me why I want to attend more than one more ward meeting because I only live in one ward. Did you still want to ask me that same question? Thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much.
And have a good night.
Thank you very much. We now move to those who signed up online, the first of whom is here in person, Tricia Connolly.
Good evening. I had the unfun pleasure of looking at the city budget, which I know all of you have. I'm not sure how deep you've gone, but I went deeper than I ever wanted to. I have some requests. Show us the debt the city has in these presentations on a bar graph, including the additional yearly costs for not paying our full share every year on the police and fire pension. It is millions of dollars. Of course, the unpaid liability turns into compounding interest, so this only gets worse over time. Evanstonians have a right to see this upfront and clearly in the budget presentations, along with our excess reserves that we have. And that is not being done, and it's very frustrating, and I don't know how any of us can weigh in a real way when that is behind the curtain. Between our bond debt and the unpaid pension and fire liability at 100%, we are now close to $500 million in debt. Yes, your own people up here told me this, confirmed it. And we're good with bonding out another $24 million in a 20-year bond with a year that's going to have high interest rates. Who is working on behalf of taxpayers in this town? Oh, wait a minute. There's no tax increase. Is this the headline to make us all feel better? City of Evanston's goals: stabilize long-term city finances. We need to rethink the whole process for how projects are put forth by staff for the next year and have greater sensitivity on where the money is coming from. Y'all want to explain how this budget represents stabilizing our finances? This is no way to operate a budget. The situation with the debt is unsustainable. City goal, climate action and resilience plan. We say we're committed to sustainability. However, the city's solar project is being funded at $200,000 each year for the next 5 years using, you guessed it, bonds. How is this a city priority when it's all on borrowed money and will end up costing us more money? The Evanston Animal Shelter proposal that's being put forth to reach some CARB goals is on the budget using 46%, you guessed it, of bonds.
15 seconds.
We've got consultants paid for bonds, projects where there has not been a vote or a public process, and some where there's even plans offered by residents, such as Beck Park, but we need to hire a consultant for $200,000.
Time.
If you're interested in keeping the people that are most at risk of being priced out of Evanston, this budget does not send that message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is online. That is Doreen Price.
Hi. Is there to be another discussion next week, Mayor? I might have misheard that.
There will not be another truth and taxation hearing, but my expectation is that there will be a discussion on the budget next week, potentially followed by votes.
Okay. Well, if I might bridge both or all three, it's what I read at the first part of this council, and this has to do with the truth and taxation and the way we view the budget. And you heard the numbers from Trish that are pretty convincing about where the money might be going that could be applied in different directions as well. So my public comment supports those numbers as well as other voices you heard about the similarities across boards, or the reason to for someone like Ray to attend all ward meetings. It's a good example of what involvement is about and that residents can make a difference. So my comment is, please extend the budget discussions beyond tonight to create budgets and policies that unite with compassion and prosperity for all. How can residents not feel ignored or excluded when old processes or biases prevail? What if increased inclusion starting now saves far more than the current budget proposal, enhances our diversity and affordability, well-being with sustainable prosperity for all? This makes me embrace exactly what Trish said fully and completely tonight. To challenge assumptions that got us here pre and post COVID-19 with federal rescue funds and ARPA, extending the budget discussions beyond tonight could also make huge difference in Evanston and nearby communities who partner with us. How else can we synergize and create procedures, policies, and budgets reflecting unity, compassion, and real prosperity for all, morally, ethically, and legally? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the input from the public as the portion of the Truth and Taxation hearing. We now move to the next portion of the hearing, which will begin with Mr. Desai. Mr. Desai, I wanted to ask you to come to the podium because there was a pretty serious allegation made during one of the comments, and I wanted to see if you had any commentary on that.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. The question is about 22 GEO bonds. And the question was asked, did we issue the GEO bonds? And the answer is no. And then they say, why then we have the projects listed against that? And I believe I can have the Lara answer that. But the intention of the Lara is that these are the projects intended to be funded out of the GO bonds when the city council adopted 22 budget last November. So that's why she's putting the 22 GO bonds funding source as an intention of that. But we haven't issued GO bonds. I mean, I've never come to the city council with any bond ordinance. And so obviously that is the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Biggs, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes. City Council, my name is Laura Biggs. I'm the city engineer. Typically, we designate bonds to be sold for projects, but the bonds are not usually sold till late summer every year. And so early in the year, this year it was at the first meeting in January of the City Council, Resolution 4R22 was adopted that basically said we will spend against the GO bonds for the year, and then we will reimburse ourselves when we approve the GO bond issue. So that committed the city to paying for the cost for 2022 GO bonds so that we could start the capital improvement program. Otherwise, we would not be able to move forward with a lot of the projects until late in the year. So that was done. We need to call them GO bonds because that's how they're designated in the budget that was adopted by City Council. And we need to be able to track them back. If somebody were to ask us, hey, how much have you spent in this pot of money, there's got to be a way to track it. And so that's why they continue to be referred to as GO bonds. And until a very specific pot of money other than 2022 GO bonds is identified, that is what the staff intends to continue to refer to them as.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the explanation. You know, I don't do this very often, but I feel compelled to do it now. This budget, like any budget of an organization our size or larger, is complicated. It inevitably, in being so complicated, leaves room for confusion or misinterpretation. I would even go so far as to say that if there's a member of the public who struggles to understand or believes they found a discrepancy when one isn't there, then that's an indication to us that we could do better, that we could communicate more clearly and communicate more effectively. But I would just have to say that it is not constructive to characterize that situation as lying. And it is counterproductive to accuse someone in public of being a liar because of either a misunderstanding or a difference of interpretation of a very, very complex, long document. And I think that it's really important as we try to work through these issues which are difficult, which are complicated, where we may have different opinions, where we will surely have different priorities, and we may at times, in good faith, have different literal understandings of the facts, to find a mechanism to express those challenges in a way that facilitates productive discussion and a meeting of the minds, not one that makes that impossible. So that's my request. It's something I try to hold myself accountable to. It's a standard I fall short of sometimes, doubtless, but I always try to do better. And it's my request of every single person who seeks to participate in this process, because without that, we're really going to find it impossible to get where this community needs us to go. So thank you, both Ms. Biggs and Mr. Desai, for that very helpful explanation. Now I want to open the Truth and Taxation hearing to council. If anyone has any questions or feedback or reactions, we begin with Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. Thank you. At first, actually, I want to throw a few questions out and allow maybe some, if you maybe take it so you can take a second to find the answer. I am curious about 2022 beach revenue, so beach token revenue. So if that's something you can.
Yeah, we can find out and
Yeah,
let you
okay.
think.
Yeah, so I'd like us to, as we are, I also want to make sure I'm doing this at the right place, because we're in the Truth and Taxation hearing. So I guess I don't know if I want to hold this until SP1, the budget ordinance, or. So,
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're going to have two opportunities to have identical discussions. So we could close the truth and taxation hearing and do it under the auspices of the next thing, or we could do it now. I don't think it matters too much, but probably officially at this point, it's supposed to be specifically about the tax levy.
Okay. Well, in that case, I mean, I'll wait, but I could, if I really wanted to say that, well, this could impact the tax levy. So I'll throw that question out there, and then we can close maybe the hearing out unless there's anything else that folks have. And I certainly want to talk about some of this stuff during the budget ordinance discussion. I'm done. No, I'll wait for the response even. I'm just looking at, I would like to know what the 2022 beach revenue is.
Terrific. Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one follow-up question on the 2022 GO bonds, and thank you for that explanation. I find it to be reasonable and logical. When are the 2022 GO bonds going to be issued?
I mean, it depends on the rate environment and our cash situation. I mean, we continue to draw down upon right now our CIP projects. Even I heard from our city engineer Biggs that we received kind of a big invoice from IDOT, some of those things. So if we have almost like 6 or 7 million outstanding to them. So if that happens, that if we get those 2-3 big bills in the next couple of months paid, we'll have to find for the money if the city council decides to move forward with the new projects, because we would already need the money for 22 projects which were adopted. Because since we did not issue the GO bonds funding, we have to find the alternative source of funding. And to add to that, if the city council decides and approve any of the CIP projects, yes, interest rate environment is volatile, so we're keeping an eye. We have a line of credit, so if the need be, we can draw upon that. But that would come at a high interest rate because it's tied to the Fed's rate, and we just saw that we had a rate increase last week. So right now, yes, I don't know. It depends on interest rate environment and our cash situation, and obviously we would continue to update the city council.
One way or the other, at some point, we need to issue 2022 GO bonds.
If we decide to move forward with the same projects, unless council decides that, okay, let's scrap these projects, even though they were adopted into the part of 22 budget.
And maybe they become 2023 GO bonds at that point.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further participation in the truth and taxation hearing from council? Hearing nothing further, I hereby adjourn this hearing. This brings us now to special orders of business. What I would like to do here is to have a discussion, which I would say the discussion can be confined to any of these special orders of business, so SP1 through SP10. Again, my request would be at the end of that discussion, there would be a motion to table all of these items to next week. But we begin with a discussion starting with Councilmember Reed.
Well, I was just going to move discussion, so I'll move discussion of items SP1 through SP, I guess, 9.
Second.
Did you?
SP10 includes capital improvement.
I'm sorry, I didn't see SP10, so yes, SP10.
That's fine, okay. So Councilmember Reed moves items SP1 through SP10. Councilmember Nusma seconds. Is there any discussion, Councilmember Reed?
Yeah, okay. Just now looking for that answer if you have it. Do you know what 2022 beach token revenue was?
We're still trying to run the report. We were looking for Audrey or someone from the investigation, but we'll give it to you.
Okay, okay. I'll continue to run that report. I'll talk about a few other things before, okay. But I'd like to get to that. So one of the things I'm really focused on, I appreciate that all of us bring a very wide range of interest and focus on the budget. And one of the things I'm laser focused on is revenue. I think that we need to make sure that we are covering the cost of many city services. And as folks know, one of the things that I'm laser focused on that I think we are over subsidizing is parking. And so there's some additional revenue that I'd like us to explore for this budget. And one is paid parking for non-residents at city facilities, particularly city recreational facilities. So if we look at, Robert Crown, if we look at Gibbs Morrison, we look at, some of these facilities, Levy Center in my ward, there are, estimates, maybe 1,000 parking spots split between all of those, maybe a little bit less than 1,000 parking spots between all of those locations. We know along the lakefront we added paid parking for non-residents last year, and that generated roughly $300,000 since we've done that. It was an $80,000 investment to get the pay boxes, and next year that's going to be just pure revenue, $300,000, 200 some odd $1,000 revenue. And so if we do this for the nearly 1,000 parking spots at city facilities, which those facilities are running year-round, not just during the summer, like the lakefront, and that parking rate, which is $3 during the summer at the lakefront, drops down to 50 cents over the not summer, over the fall and spring. So with that, adding this paid parking for non-residents at city facilities could bring in potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'd love staff to look into that and come up with some projections, and I'd love to work that into the budget, and I would love to see those funds bolster our investments last year in green infrastructure. And so that could be a few $100,000 in going toward our CARP goals and other goals, and not on the backs of Evanston residents. So,
Councilman Reed,
Sure.
I just got the number. I was looking at the September report.
Sure.
For the beaches, we have $513,000 revenue as of 9/30.
All right, $530,000.
13.
Oh, $513,000 in beach token revenue last year, plus $300,000 in
513,000 this year.
Yeah, $513,000 this year plus $300,000 in parking revenue takes us pretty much right back to roughly where we were in beach revenue. So we didn't really experience a major loss in beach revenue. So I just wanted to highlight that. That was a separate fact, separate from what I'm talking about here. But certainly, I would love if there's some interest amongst my colleagues that we can give our parking staff direction to look into adding pay boxes at city facilities for non-Evanston residents and bringing back revenue projections for that. Those folks would be using city facilities. We can capture some revenue to help cover the cost. So I don't know if there's any way that we can just let Mike and Lucas know that we're interested in that, so they, spend some time on this and bring it back to us before we pass this budget. I think that would be great for revenue. And I know my time is likely running up because we've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to quickly move through a few other things. So that's one. That could be a few $100,000 there. The Economic Development Committee and the Environment Board have looked at a plastic bag tax. It's somewhat, there's been a lot of conversation with our business community. I think there's ways that we can improve it, but again, that could be a significant source of revenue for us next year, and I would love us to maybe expedite the process of the plastic bag tax and try to get it worked in. Even if we get it later in the year, that's fine, but that's revenue that we shouldn't leave on the table. It hasn't come up for a vote yet, but allowing hookah bars to operate within the city of Evanston. Again, with tobacco sales tax and other sales taxes, these businesses could bring in, again, significant revenue to the city, particularly if they mix a restaurant with the hookah bar. So there'd be significant sales tax revenue. And in fact, I have business owners who are interested in opening on Howard Street, which desperately needs more attractions for folks. And
your time is up, so if you could bring your remarks to a
yes,
close.
I'll bring my
please.
remarks to a close here very quickly. Then secondly, we increased the wheel tax last year. I think for next year, we could look at another $5 increase of the wheel tax. That would bring in $250,000 plus, or roughly $250,000 of revenue for the city. If we were to increase it by another $5, that would begin to put us in alignment with Chicago, for example. So we would not be charging more than Chicago, and that'd be, again, more money that we could invest into our green infrastructure. The last increase is supporting the 2 new positions in Kara's department. And then lastly, I'm closing out here. I would like to see our budget ordinance. When I read through our budget ordinance, it's a very, it's not, I'd like to see it go into a bit more detail. I'd like to see it zoom in to the department level. There are, various fund levels there, and it gives staff instruction to stay within those fund levels, but I'd like us to zoom in a little closer to the department level so there's more budget controls of moving money between departments and moving money between different business units. And so that would come to council for approval before we make those transfers. And I think we can do that with efficiency that allows staff the ability to move, but also gives this body and the taxpayers more oversight and control over spending. So that's it for now.
Councilmember Harris.
So I just wanted to ask Councilmember Reed about the parking. So do you not believe that would create people not using our facilities if they had to park would that change the revenue that the Levy Center would get from external people? Just trying to understand.
Yeah, I understand. I don't think so. I mean, I think our beach is an example. We're making, 900 to, slightly a million, just about $1 million a year from our lakefront and beach tokens. And last year, with Evanston residents not having to pay a dime, we still made $513,000. And so, if there's something special there, people are going to come. People are used to paying for parking. And so charging non-Evanston residents at these facilities, I do not think will deter people, and we'll charge them an appropriate rate. And I think it'll generate, they're not paying us, property taxes and other taxes that support those facilities. And so this will be a contribution to make sure that we can provide the best services for Evanston residents and those who travel here to use our.
Okay, thank you. So that was question 1. What I'd like to see for budget, where I come from, direction is given to the budget, and I know I'm new. I'm going to say that until I'm not new anymore, which may never be never. Is that we provide direction as a council for the budget, that we say we want to come in flat, we expect certain things, not it come to us and then we have to deal with it. But again, I came in at the middle of the budget season, but all the places that I've worked, direction has been given to, we're going to come in flat. We need you to do this and that. So I'd like to see that in future budgets. That's all.
Councilmember Kelly.
So I concur with Councilmember Harris. I also think that would be easier for everybody if we were to, say, for example, we would like to see no increase in the levy and no long-term bonds while the rates are high. I think that would make it easier for everybody. I do want to point out that one of our stated goals for many years now, including this year, is that of stabilizing long-term city finances. Doing that means also fully funding our public, our police and fire pensions. It has blown up now to probably over $240 million at this point. If we had been fully funding this all along, right, this year we'd be paying $7 million instead of about $21 million in our levy. So this, I really want to see us start that this year, and I think there are ways to do that. I think we really have to take a serious look at our unassigned funds. Last year, I think we were all kind of shocked when and again, this is speaking a little bit to Councilmember Harris's idea that we need guardrails. And I've talked to some, senior management staff who said, yeah, we really don't have any. So I think it is really important that we start to set that. I think it'll make it, again, easier for everybody. But last year, when April rolled around, we found out that there had been overspending to the tune of $11.5 million, which kind of makes this process look just kind of like a quaint, activity passing the budget, right? When we say, oh, we overspent 11.5, would you please amend that budget? That's not 100,000 or 50,000, 11.5 million. But when that happened, we also found out that we had a surplus. We had unobligated, unrestricted, unassigned funds of $31 million. And that wasn't revealed to us last year when we were doing the budget. So we could have fully funded police and fire last year. We could have. We had $31 million in unassigned funds. And that's hugely important. The year before that, we had 16. And the year before that, we had 10. And I've compared this to other audits in other cities. We're way above. I mean, that was, exceeded all of our surrounding cities. So I would say that we should take a hard look, and I think, Chief Polyp is also going to speak to maybe ways that we can do that, fully fund our police and fire. But I would also say we need to take a hard look at those unassigned funds. Right now, I understand that we have a 14, maybe 0.4 surplus. Maybe it's more. I know last year, after, I've fought throughout the whole budget process to keep our levy flat, and after it was passed, I asked, what did we get for our transfer tax, for example? And nobody knew until a few weeks later. Then finally at the end of the year, we budgeted $3 million, and it turned out we got $6.1 million. Well, we didn't know that we had that extra $3 million while we were trying to figure out the budget for 22. So this is really essential to being able to really exercise, fiscal responsibility and to really, fulfill that stated goal of stabilizing long-term city finances. I think we want to do two things. I think we really need to start fully funding now our police and fire pension, and I think we also need to, at all costs, avoid issuing long-term debt at high interest rates. Because right now what we're looking at is double or even maybe triple. So everything, and I've asked also for a while for prioritization of what capital improvement projects do we absolutely have to do. I still haven't received that versus what can we put off. And I still want to see that for our next session on Monday. That would be really helpful because I think that's where we should cut back in terms of a 2023 bond issuance at a high rate. And, I just want to mention, like when I looked at some of the S&P and some of the rating agencies, the first thing that they point out in terms of Evanston's weakness in its budget is very weak debt profile with poorly funded pensions. This is from S&P. Substantially underfunded. A credit weakness is Evanston's large pension obligation. Over and over, this is what it says. We view the statutory level reflecting a 90% funding goal by 2040 as a fairly weak funding metric that defers cost into the future. So we need to start doing this now if we're serious about our goals. And also on the beach, the dog beach, I know that'll bring in a lot of money also. This morning I was there at sunrise and there were about 6 or 7 people and several of them were not from Evanston. They were from Skokie and other places. So I think that will also add to that total fund. Thank you.
Speaking of which, I think Chief Polyp does have a brief presentation to share. Is that right?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Clerk Mendoza, members of council, and City Manager Luke Stowe. I come to you today and the fire department's going to be asking for 7 firefighter paramedics to staff our 3rd ambulance and to keep our 5th engine in service at all times. What I'd like to do is today show you a presentation on why this ask is coming today and a funding source where we would be able to do this. Long overdue issue here. Give us a second here. Okay. So I'd like to start with the funding source. So in 2019, the Evanston Fire Department worked with some folks in Northbrook, chiefs of Northbrook, who told us about this new funding source called GEMT. This is Ground Emergency Transport Service. And what this does is we charge $1,500 for an ambulance call, whether it's a BLS call or an ALS call. This GEMT funding source was adopted by the state of Illinois in 2019. And what this does is this pays the difference through Medicare and mixed insurance payers. So this funding source, they take everything that we do in the fire service, our rigs, our stations, our employees, and they figure what it would actually cost to run an ambulance call based on how we respond. So the amount that we charge, $1,500, they supplement it, and they, as the state Medicare mixed payer, they supplement the rest, which is another $2,500. That money is then split with the state, so we keep half, they keep half, and as you can see on the graph, we started this, we put in 2019, this shows the money that comes in quarters, and this is the money that we keep, not the money that goes to the state. So as we move into the next year, we are on pace to receive $2.5 to $2.7 million from this fund. This next slide shows our ambulance calls and our calls for service. As you can see, since the 80s, we've had 2 ambulances. Since 1986, we've doubled our call volume in the EMS world, and we have not added a person to our department. So we're at 7,400 calls. This year alone, I'm guessing we're probably going to be about 11,000 calls total, 7,400, our best guess, EMS. What this graph, or what this chart will show you is, as of today, projected 2022 on the left-hand side, our ambulance, we have 3 ambulances, Ambulance 21, Ambulance 22, and Ambulance 23. 23 is our jump company. This is what we are asking to put in full service. Ambulance 21 runs 3,600 calls a year. Ambulance 22, 3,300 calls a year. Compared just to our MABUS neighbors, we're running about 1,000 calls more than our MABUS neighbors per ambulance. Why you see the 380 is because when our ambulances get toned out, Ambulance 21 goes on a call, Ambulance 22 goes on a call. If both ambulances are out, the third one gets called. Our members are very good at going to the hospital, taking a patient, going to the hospital, picking up that third call, getting back in service without doing the reports, without getting the proper supplies that they need. Now, our ambulances are stocked to do this, but we could do better. We could do much better. Not only that, when that third ambulance is out, it takes that 5th engine offline. What we project for 23, if this were to happen, if we were to get these 7 members, is our ambulance calls would come down, and we would gain ambulance calls on Ambulance 23, which would split the work, okay? And it's very important that we do that. As the numbers show, we average about 8, almost 9 calls a day for an ambulance. Now, that's just if you take our ambulance calls and divide it by 365 days. Usually that is not the case. There are some days our ambulances are running 17 calls a day. Some days we're doing 4, but you have to remember we're doing training. We're doing making sure our equipment is working. So this is a busy day. This is a really, really busy day for our folks, and they're really doing a great job by doing this. This will also affect how often we call other departments in. We have plenty of responses, especially our working fire response, where we automatically call Skokie in for a battalion chief, a truck, and an ambulance, because we send 2 ambulances to a working fire, one for our members, one for any residents. Now, if there's multiple residents, those ambulances go for the residents first, and then we call another department in to be on standby for our members. So this would change a lot of our working fire responses, a lot of our mutual aid responses, and yeah, this is where we're at with the calls and the money coming in. We're kind of at that point where we're intersecting We have a means of doing it. Our calls are at the point where it's warranted, and this is what the cost would be, is our best estimate. If we were to hire everyone trained, like the top, let's say the top 7 people on the list were all trained, all firefighters, paramedics, the very far end where it says low end, that's what it would cost at the very bottom, $566,000. Middle of the road, if we had to train half of them, the other half came in as firefighter paramedics, we would be at $642,000. And if we had to train everybody and outfit everybody, it'd be at a $724,000 cost. I do really believe we can do this. I do believe we've acquired this funding source. I don't think it's going anywhere for a long time. It's a state legislated source. So that's the presentation I wanted to give you for the 7 firefighters that we are asking for.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you. I'll support the chief. I had my light on before the chief's presentation, and I know that in your documentation you benchmarked Evanston against 8 other communities. I ran those numbers, and with 2 ambulances, we are by far the outlier in terms of ambulances per capita or ambulances per call. Even with 3, we're still on the low end, so I'm definitely supporting this one.
Thank you, sir.
I do have some other comments and questions. How much time do I have here?
4.5 minutes.
4.5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to blast through them. Comment number 1, I fully support adding additional staff to Kara Pratt's department to support CARP implementation. I'd love to do more. I'd love to spend $25 million on CARP, but this is the best budget by far, the greenest budget by far, since Evanston first committed to climate action in 2008. We're tripling the size of the department, so that's a good thing. Next comment. This actually is a question for our Public Works Department. Does this budget proposal include any money for private sewer lateral repair? Knowing that issue is still pending in front of the NPW committee.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Dave Stomack, Deputy City Manager. In that memo, we indicate that the funding source would be the $75,000 that's allocated in the sewer fund for emergency sewer repairs. That funding gets spent on city sewer mains sometimes. Sometimes we exceed it, sometimes we don't spend any. Depends if the city has a collapsed sewer main or not. But we would overspend it if these came in, and it would go into the sewer reserve fund. We would take money out of the sewer reserve. We would track the expenses, and then if we indicate that this is more expensive, we would would ask for a sewer rate increase in future years to meet the increase in spending for this item.
All right, so
it is not included in the 75,000 is included in the 23
which is
budget.
standard. That's been the case, 75,000 for the last few years. So this budget doesn't really contemplate a super duper increase in cost by performing
no, it does not.
Private sewer lateral repairs. If we find that they are super expensive, we'll have to come back in future budgets and figure out how to pay for them.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Next question. With regards to the capital improvement projects on the Civic Center, other folks might want to weigh in here too, but I'm looking at $3 million for window replacement, which I am not personally inclined to spend that much money on an asset unless we are darn sure we're going to be staying here. I understand that deferred maintenance is just going to increase costs a little down the road, but if those aren't going to be our costs, that's something that we need to think about. And I'm wondering if rather than $3 million in new windows, there's, I hate to say it, a Band-Aid that involves some caulk that will at least get us through the next few years.
In item 10, we talk about the CIP, and you'll notice that any of the projects in the Civic Center are not shown to be actually completed in 23 at this point in time, per staff's, trying to understand direction from the City Council on other discussions. So again, that's still the city council to make the final decision, but we are not specifically showing those projects as something that staff is moving forward with in the proposed 23 budget.
Okay. Are we, we're talking about all 10 items here now, right? I don't have to limit my questions to SB1, so, okay.
Yes, and there is a way to caulk the windows. The staff estimates a budget number of $600,000 for the caulk. The thing is, you might caulk the windows and then find that you would have issues with them still, even though they're caulked.
Yeah, understood. Okay, thank you.
And there is a presentation to go with SP10 when we get to it.
Okay. Where am I on my list? Fountain Square, maybe that's another SP10 item, so we can do that? Be curious to see what the presentation says, but Fountain Square, we are... Okay, let's do that. I have another question that is not capital improvement related, so I'll hold my CIP questions until we see the presentation. But before we get there, we are anticipating at some point that Northwestern University will put in a very expensive new stadium, and we are anticipating an unknown amount of permit revenue. Perhaps, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, this money is probably not yet definitive enough to budget for. So I'm not suggesting we budget for that money, but let's maybe consider that potential windfall as one funding source that we could direct towards our pension obligations without having to increase taxes or fees. We could potentially look at that as windfall revenue and start to pay some bills that need to be paid. So I have other questions on CIP, but I'll hold them for the presentation.
Let's then go to the presentation next before further speakers.
Members of the City Council, City Clerk, and City Manager, my name is Laura Biggs, and I'm the City Engineer for Evanston. And just want to give an update on the CIP based on information and questions that were asked in previous meetings. So as background, we introduced the CIP at the September 19th meeting prior to the budget being posted to allow for a longer discussion period. And on October 17th, we did a presentation discussing primarily different characteristics about projects that staff members or that the City Council had requested of staff to provide. Tonight, there's some updates and corrections to the City CIP, as well as information that was requested in previous presentations. So the first thing I will note is there are 3 items that we are updating or correcting the CIP based on revised information. We had indicated funding for a dog park installation. We're just retitling that so that we could send that money towards any funding needed at the dog beach. Second, the Twigs Park Skate Park. We did receive a $400,000 grant, which was not represented in the CIP, the 2023 proposed CIP. We are adding that in, but because construction inflation has been so high, we are recommending that we just add it and we don't reduce the other funding sources at this time. That project is actually planned to go out to bid over the winter. We are first pre-qualifying contractors through a process that's going to start pretty soon, but the work that's been done to determine a bid price, the consultant has done the drawing, so it is easier now to just let the project bid and find out what the actual price is on the market than to try to modify it. And then the third one is related to the fire department and the GEMT funding. There's a substantial need to replace a lot of SCBA and safety equipment for the fire department, of which $440,000 would be budgeted this year and funded from the GEMT. One of the questions that was asked was related to We had shown there are 17 projects that are considered shovel-ready, and I'm using the term shovel-ready because this is a term that is frequently used by federal and state governments when they are sending out infrastructure money. So those are projects that are deemed to be ready to bid within just a couple of months with relatively little effort so that they can go right into construction in a short time after the funds are released. So we had designated 17 shovel-ready projects in the 2023 CIP at this time. By the time we get to the end of winter, there will be more, but they're not already yet. And of those, 11 of the projects do have grant funding associated with them. There's more detailed information in one of the attachments to the memo showing exactly which project. Of that, you can see that, my eyes are not great, 13 grants have been received, 2 loans, and 1 litigation that we would get money reimbursed through litigation for the repairs at Fountain Square. Of the projects that are not shovel-ready but have actually already received grants, there are 11 projects in that situation having received 13 grants. So you can see that quite a lot of our big projects we do actually receive grant money for. We were also requested to identify projects that we were developing in anticipation applying for grants. And again, that a detailed list is included in the attachment to the memo. However, of that, there are 13 projects, of which we've identified approximately 9 grant funding opportunities. Some of them use the same things like IEPA, state revolving loan funds, or motor fuel tax funds is another one that applies to a number of different projects. But if those projects are due to go into construction over a variety of years, but if we look over the next 5 years, it's approximately $50 to $80 million worth of grants that we plan to apply for or utilize. We were also asked to provide a chart showing specifically general obligation bonds and which projects are using general obligation bonds. We show not just 2023 general obligation bonds in that chart, but 2022 general obligation bonds. Per our earlier discussion, we have not yet issued the 2022 GO bonds. However, staff budgets them as if we have, because staff has been directed that we are committed to funding those items. However, since the bonds are not issued, it is possible to modify the GO bond issue at the time. Whenever the GO bond issue does occur, normally it occurs in midsummer or late summer, we actually modify the GO bond issue every year to decrease it to reflect what is actually likely to be built. We started to provide that list. We had a number of things then happen which changed the situation. So we haven't really done that list, but whenever the bond issues are finally and truly issued, we usually take a look at where we are with our spending and also the status of the projects to decrease them wherever possible. Finally, you'll see the updated project characteristics matrix that is included as attachment D to the memo. And what we did here was we actually color-coded a bunch of projects that was based on our understanding of some of the feedback we were receiving from City Council of what they wanted to see potentially moved forward into the capital improvement program. And so projects that are color-coded green are projects in which we are receiving substantial non-bond funding. Not to say that all of the funding comes without using bonds, because in many cases we do have to provide matching funding for bonds, but these are the projects which have a significant revenue source that is not 2022 or 2023 general obligation bonds. We've also got 2 projects where we have basically gotten under contract and committed to using 2023 funds. That includes the police fire elevator modifications, which are somewhat of an emergency project and are already underway, and as well as the sorry, I'm blanking for a minute. The street light pole replacement, we entered into a 10-year contract that has a minimum purchase requirement, while we had actually proposed $300,000 based on the need that we were seeing in the last few years to repair the street lights where the poles are failing and falling over. Our minimum purchase would be $120,000. So that could be reduced. The consequence would actually just be we would have street light poles that aren't working properly. And finally, oops. projects that address a life safety issue. We identified 4 projects at the last meeting, but there's also some projects that staff considers to be critical to being able to run our emergency operations like snow removal. And that those projects are shown there. So when you look at, I'm going to set aside 2022 bonds for the moment because some aren't being moved forward, and those are bonds that have not yet been committed to a contract. We have spent other bonds which are under contract, but these are the uncommitted bonds. But the 2023 GO bond issue with just those items is around $10 million. Each year, we tend to budget, when we adopt the budget, around $12 to $13 million in general obligation bonds for that year. But by the time we sell the bonds, we reduce it to $10 million. So our bond issues are fairly consistent. And so I would just indicate that if you only were to fund these 3 sets of items, that would already be at the $10 million bond mark. There are actually several other contracts or projects that staff would recommend moving forward with that are approximately $2 million additional, which I'm happy to discuss, but that is the situation where we're at. So in conclusion, there are 3 things that before you leap into giving us additional feedback, I would just remind you, the CIP projects do take quite a long time to complete, and they're budgeted over multiple years. If you delay the concept planning or the first steps, then you delay the completion. And that may not seem like a big deal at the moment, but in 4 years, if you wish that you had done it, we will not probably be able to move faster. So I just caution you that that does matter. When we make the CIP budget, because I have received a number of emails and questions regarding the budget number for very specific projects, staff makes their best estimate based on the funding or the cost that we have spent on previous projects and our guess at construction inflation. We are not able to do detailed cost estimates most of the time, particularly at the beginning of a project. So we make our best estimate. The market value of the final design that is bid by the contractors decides how accurate we are. I can tell you that probably every estimate we make is off by at least a few dollars. That is just a given. It is very difficult to predict costs 3 years in advance. And then finally, I would say that, as I said before, staff actually would like to reduce the Parks and Facilities CIP from what was originally published in the budget because we do not have the ability on staff to execute all of those projects and manage them. So we are totally fine, and we would encourage you to consider a reduction in those 2 categories. I do have recommendations about what I would move forward if you are interested, but they're just recommendations, and we're happy to comply with whatever the City Council would like to prioritize. Just going to grab my notebook.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
I'd like to hear Laura Biggs' suggestions first.
The first item I would recommend funding, and actually it might be helpful if you put up that Excel spreadsheet, although I don't know if this will, you might need to steal your mouse. The first thing I would recommend funding is, if we scroll down to sustainability, is to fund all the sustainability projects, simply because most of those projects are the concept planning or early studies that are needed to move the program forward in future years. And if we want to continue growing CARP, I think these projects are really critical to fund. Next, I would suggest, if you go back to transportation, actually, traffic calming, bicycle, pedestrian improvements, safety improvements, this item is $225,000. However, it pays for all of the traffic calming, speed humps, crosswalks, bike racks, spotlighting improvement requests. Like, I'm at this crosswalk and I feel like it's not safe to cross because the lighting isn't good enough. And additional pavement markings, all of those things, which are a lot of the interaction that we actually have with council members on a regular basis, tend to be funded out of this line item. So these are very personal improvements to the residents. They affect the local neighborhood at the most detailed level, and I would recommend that you move forward with this item. The third thing is under facilities. We're currently finalizing the master plan for the service center, and there will be a presentation on that. And I do not know what the first project to be move forward will be recommended. However, I do think we should consider putting $200,000 to pay for the consulting services to design that project, because there are a number of building systems at the service center that are failing. So I'm not saying that we know exactly what that project is. I'm saying that HVAC, structural, and electrical systems are all in very bad condition, and we should move forward as soon as the council feels they have enough information on that. I would also say on the roof replacements, at least 2 of those buildings have active roof leaks going on. I would recommend we move forward with those roof replacement projects. All of them are in bad condition. The beach houses, even if they don't have active roof leaks, some have missing shingles. They're old and they're at the end of their useful life. And then so altogether, those 2 numbers are $550,000. And then the final thing is in parks. Arrington Lagoon, a section of the pathway which is supported by the retaining wall or the wall of the pond, is starting to cave in. I would recommend that we fix this promptly, because if the wall caves in, we will probably drain the lagoon. And if that happens at the beginning of the summer, then the lagoon will not be active for the summer. That is something that is acceptable in terms of public safety, but isn't great. So I would recommend the wall repair at $200,000. I would recommend we move forward with Beck Park. We have already funded concept planning. The constituency has waited quite a long time for this park to move forward with public engagement that happens periodically, but not consistently. Now that we have a consultant, they're going to complete the public engagement, and we had hoped to move into contract document preparation next year. So the $200,000 is to help pay for the design services for that consultant. And then the James Park pathway reconstruction at $300,000 is, there is a section of the pathway, the walking pathway, at the south end of the park along Mulford, next to the ball diamonds, where the pathway acts as the sidewalk along Mulford. And that pathway is failed enough that it is not traversable by somebody with mobility issues. So it's not the whole pathway. The pathway is expensive because we have to reconstruct it. The soil isn't great. But I would recommend for ADA and reasons, and because it is right next to the ball diamonds and it is along Mulford where there is street parking, that we move forward with that section of $300,000 of pathway reconstruction. I will say we have a number of other parks that we moved into concept planning. We are struggling to schedule all the public engagement meetings because council members and other critical decision makers have a lot on their calendar. Because of that, it's entirely possible we wouldn't get to bid those, like Independence and Larimer Park, until the fall, and most of the money would be spent in 2024. So I would just recommend that we delay construction. I know those parks are in very bad condition, but it may naturally happen anyway that we delay construction to 2024. Those are my comments.
So,
yes.
So
if you
Councilmember
adopted-
Hadakatis has the floor still.
I will say one last comment. If you adopted all the things I just said, which you do not have to do, it would be an additional $2 million. $2 million, approximately.
I have a question about Fountain Square.
Yes.
So if we delay that, so technically it's shovel-ready, we know what has to be done. Is there any potential drawback, because we know it needs to be repaired, doing it in 2024 versus 2023?
There are 2 drawbacks, but these are hard choices. The first is that we are in a litigation with the contractor, and I really don't want to talk about it too much because of that. But if we had an actual price for the fix from a bid, that would be helpful in our case to make sure that whatever the final resolution, the city's costs are covered. The second thing is that it will only get more expensive. So we received an initial price that was less than what's shown in the budget here, which I escalated because of construction inflation, which has not slowed down. We expect it to be higher in 2024. But that is true of pretty much all the projects.
Okay, great. And then I think this is like a procedural question for Hitesh. So with revenue from something like litigation, how is that handled in the budget? We can't really say a project is contingent on receiving outside funding like
Right,
that?
so we don't budget because of the uncertainty nature. But generally, if we get some money, we put it either in the CIP fund or it is kind of handled through the insurance fund.
And then we could potentially act afterward.
Correct.
Great.
Councilmember Ravel.
I guess, first of all, I'd like to echo Councilmember Kelly's plea for us to put more money into our pension fund. At least, even if we don't do the full ramping up, I don't know, I need to see what would a slow ramp up look like and compared to a jump in right away for, so, the glide path that we need. So, for example, I would suggest, I'd rather have us put more money into the pension than start working towards bringing our fund balance up from the 16.6% up to the 20%. If we need to find $1.6 million for this year's pension fund, we could hold off a year on starting to bring up our fund balance. I had a question about the newly revised budget shows us removing the grants officer position from the budget, and I guess I sort of expected that person would pay for him or herself. I don't know if anybody wants to address that. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Clerk Mendoza. To answer the question, after discussion with staff and also our lobbyists, we felt it was best to, instead of having an FTE grants officer position, instead contract out as needed basis for grant writing purposes, which makes sense too, because in certain cases, whether it's a brownfields grant or a cybersecurity grant or a health and human services grant, we want to work with people who are subject matter experts. So we felt it was better to withdraw the grants officer position and instead contract as needed with grant writers.
And we're able to get a grant writer quickly to be able to write a grant proposal for one of these identified opportunities?
That's our hope. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, correct.
Okay. And since you mentioned the lobbyist, I did kind of wonder about our lobbyist. I thought when we agreed to hire the lobbyist, we were going to get quarterly reports or something about what we were learning from our lobbyist.
I'll be happy to check with Drexwood and check with them on the quarterly reports.
Because I do think I think the council was a little surprised about hiring a lobbyist, and so we wanted to have some reports about what the lobbyist was doing
Sure.
for us. Okay. I share with Councilmember Newsma some concerns about putting a lot of money into the Civic Center, since we really don't know what we're about to do with that. And I'm glad to have further direction from Laura about what to do with our capital improvements plan, so I'll take another look at that. That's it for right now.
No one who has not yet spoken is asking to speak, so we go to Councilmember Newsma with 1 minute left.
My questions have already been answered through the course of this discussion, so I'll reserve for now.
Councilmember Kelly with half a minute left.
So just to respond to Councilmember Ravel, it's about 4.5 million that we would have to come up with. And again, I ask that we look at our projected balance for our unassigned funds. Again, last year it was 31 million, and we weren't aware of that when we were doing our budget. So I know we're saying it's 14 point something, but I've asked for projected expectations, for example, on property transfer taxes and other areas where we have over the years been ending up with very large surpluses. So I think we should look at that. I think we really can. Last year we could have fully funded. We could have covered it with our unassigned fund balance. So I just want to give you that it's 4.5 million. And I think I just used it. I had one more. Let's see. Okay, I guess that's it. And again, so if I can get those, or if we can get those for next time, the projection on what that will be by years. And I realize it's not going to be, exact, but I think it would be really helpful for us to have those numbers. Thank you.
Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. How are we, so I understand, City Manager Stowe, that we removed the budgeted position for the grant writer, but contractors aren't free, so I just thought about that. How are we going to pay for them?
Yeah, Dave and I have talked about funding it out of CMO budget, for contingency. So we're estimating maybe in the neighborhood of $30,000 per year. Could be a little higher than that, but that's kind of what we're targeting at this point.
Because I remember this, unless you learned something different, but I know on one of our bi-weeklies, I think you found out that the contingency amount is not as high as you thought. So is that going to fully exhaust your contingency?
It would not.
It would not.
It would not.
All right. Wanted to thank Laura for bringing up Vex Park expansion project. I was going to bring that up. I saw it wasn't highlighted in any of the wonderful colors, so thank you for bringing that up, because they have, I think that's been a discussion that at least goes back to the water treatment facility, probably before that was even construction even started. I think discussions about Vex Park expansion started, so that neighborhood over there has been waiting for a while. So, so I, would also like to see that added to this budget. And then to Councilmember Reed's point about parking fees at community centers, I'd like to see some information as he suggested it, described it, but also I think there's an opportunity to do dynamic parking where it may not be fees every day, but during peak hours, especially at Robert Crown and Levy Center, it may make sense to charge during those peak hours, and which I think is part of the dynamic parking, which could be considered a dynamic parking strategy. So please bring the information back as Councilman Reed described, but also if we didn't do it every day, all day, what would it look like to do it during those peak hours and peak days? And that's all. Thank you.
Next is Councilmember Hadakaris with 4 minutes and 10 seconds left.
Bobby asked my question. I'm good.
So the only people who are requesting to speak at this time are Council Members Kelly and Reed, who've already exhausted all their time. I'll give you each just 30 seconds for a last question. We'll start with Councilmember Reed.
I would ask that, we're talking about the budget, we're talking 10 items at the same time. I'm not going to go long, but I would ask for more than 30 seconds.
And with the council's indulgence, we can allow that. Our rule says.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Councilmember Ravel. I wanted to, I'll be brief still. I wanted to check on a few things. So I looked at the budget. I don't see the refugee resettlement fund moving forward. And so I wanted to make sure that that $50,000 is included in this budget for the Human Services Fund. So is there someone who can answer that? Yeah.
Good day, members of the City Council. Ike Ogbo, Director, Health and Human Services Department. So the Refugee Fund allocation has already been created. It is created out of the Human Services Fund. There is a designated amount of $50,000 for it.
Correct. Yeah, thank you. I understand that. What I'm looking for is that to make an annual contribution. So I'd love to see $50,000 added, for 2023.
Okay.
So I would like to have a couple motions. I would like to amend the budget to include $50,000 for the refugee fund for 2023. A $50,000 contribution.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion.
So it needs to be in writing in that case.
Okay. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. If I can get folks, where folks leaning? Okay, folks are okay with that. So I'm going to make that motion in a second, and I'll put it in writing. Secondly, our gas tax. So we are looking at our revenue. We're expecting about a $200,000 dip in the gas tax. I think if we raised by gas tax, our motor fuel tax, if we raised our motor fuel tax by 1 penny, we could realize $200,000 in revenue. That would mean right now we charge 3 cents per gallon. That would take us up to 4 cents per gallon. For comparison, Chicago charges 8 cents per gallon. So we'd still be much lower than one of our biggest neighbors. And so again, a penny would bring in $200,000. It would really bring in close to $300,000, but I'm assuming, let's say some people choose to go elsewhere. $200,000 is fairly conservative, and that again can go back into our climate action. So I'd like to make a motion on that as well, if there's any interest in that. It would be a penny to the motor fuel tax. And I'd love for staff to come back and bring us some information on that, but I think we should consider it. I also think, again, $200,000, if we just, $250,000 if we increase the wheel tax by $5. I'd like staff to bring that back as a proposal. And then lastly on the revenue front, I think, just those few proposals there would, bring almost a little bit less, $700 and some odd thousand, almost $1 million.
So I just want to interject here because we're now coming up to 3 minutes. Is the direction from council just to remove time limitations for the evening? Is that people's preference?
I was under the impression this was going to be short.
Okay. I'm closing out here. I do want to make these motions, so but this is a serious thing. We're talking about our city's budget. 5 minutes isn't really, even 7 minutes isn't enough to really fully discuss this. So
I guess I would suggest that if it's a serious thing, asking people to vote on motions that are made on the fly without having had discussion in advance is not the best way to approach it. Mr. Cummings?
I was just going to offer the suggestion, if the mayor's request to move these to next week is done, that those amendments can actually be on the agenda next week if you don't want to make the motion tonight.
Yeah, that's all. I want to make sure that we're given direction. I want to make sure that we're using staff's time efficiently, particularly since we're here in the last crunch. That's why I wanted a vote on these items, just to make clear that there's some interest in the items. That's all I'm interested in. So I'm interested in a $5 increase in the wheel tax, a 1 cent increase in the motor fuel tax, and the paid parking for non-residents at city facilities. I think between those proposals there, that's about $1 million of new revenue that we could bring in. That is in a green way. It's green revenue because it's charging for motor fuel, which we want to encourage people to move away from. It's charging for the wheel tax. We want more people riding bikes and using alternative forms of transportation. And then it's charging for parking at city facilities for non-Evanston residents. And then lastly, I'll close out here. There are two things.
I guess I want to renew my request for guidance from council. Well,
no one's interrupting. I guess if somebody interrupts other than you, then that will be the guidance. I'll hold
Well,
for now.
no. We had this discussion last week, and I want us to hold to what we said we
We
were
made a
going.
motion on 10 different proposals at once.
I get
I just want to
that.
be clear. We're not talking about one thing, we're talking about 10 different things all at the same time.
All right, it sounds like there's a request that the time limitation is upheld. Can you please conclude your remarks?
I almost want to withdraw my motion on this and break these up so we have enough time to discuss each item. We're talking about the budget, but.
I think council has
James
given
Park
us
lighting,
direction.
We just had 3 presentations. We had a fire presentation, we had a CIP presentation, we're talking about budget. There's a lot of moving parts right now.
I get that, but, well, I'll wait till my turn.
I have some questions about the James Park lighting. That's important to the residents in my ward. I'd like to know about this. I guess we'll have other opportunities to talk about this, but we're talking about a lot of things all at once. So,
Councilmember Harris with 3 minutes and 50 seconds left.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to be clear with some of the things that you said. We're talking about taxation, and I had 3 very candid people who come to every single meeting, and I appreciate that they come, and they come to other ward meetings. And we talked about working on this tax, but at the end of the day, I heard you talk about a wheel tax, a gas tax, a parking, and a bag tax. So we're back to taxing our community members, and while it's green, it's disenfranchising some of the people that we need to protect. So if we're talking about a gas, many people can't afford electric cars right now. If we're talking about bags, you're talking about people who in communities probably walk or take the bus and may not have the space to have all these extra bags. So I just want us to be careful that we're going to work on the tax here, but then we're going to tax them over here. I yield back my time. That if Councilmember Reed needs my 2 minutes, you can have them.
Just 2 minutes for you if you want them.
yeah, I appreciate that thought. That's why I'm laser focused on, particularly with the transportation funds, the motor fuel tax, particularly with the wheel tax. I still am very supportive of using the money for expanding the 2 positions in Kara Pratt's department. I think that's critical. But, what I would have proposed, outside of that, I really like the proposal, but I would like to see us make more investments in making green modes of transportation more affordable to residents. So I think we can, tax motor fuel at 1 penny per gallon more and realize a lot of money. We can tax plastic bags, which we need to move away. Those plastic bags that those low-income folks are using are not healthy for our community, not healthy for them, and we need to move people away from that. And this will help us with the revenue to one, secure the resources we need in order to make that change, but also to inform and educate people about the need for the change. And then you mentioned the wheel tax again. We have a $100 million unfunded infrastructure liability, and a huge portion of that is our transportation infrastructure. And again, so we need to really start getting folks to pay the correct share to cover that infrastructure. And then lastly, the paid parking. This would be for non-Evanston residents at city facilities who aren't contributing to our tax base the way Evanston residents are, but are still using our city facilities, enjoying the amenities that we offer. And I think they also need to chip in their fair share for the enjoyment of those amenities. And that's, this tax would only impact, or that parking revenue would only impact those folks. So I'll hold there. And then I also proposed things like, adding a hookah bar, allowing that under our code, which again would not be regressive in any means. It'd allow a new business, and these businesses could bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars of cigarette tax or tobacco tax revenue, of other sources of revenue, similar to other businesses. And so there's good opportunities here.
Thank you very much. Now, seeing that no one else, so Councilmember Kelly is good. Yes, there's
So
precedent appears to have been set and then demolished and then set again. Go ahead.
So I just want to point out that this year, something actually quite good happened, right, with our budget. And I think, we significantly reduced our debt. And I think we should, kudos to staff and to this council. We for the first time in many, many years, we kept the levy flat and we significantly reduced our debt. So I just really want to continue in that same direction. And I don't know, in terms of how much debt will roll off next year. I apologize, I don't know that number, but it's not going to be the same, what rolls off and what rolls on in terms of interest. So I would just say we should continue in that mode so that we aren't issuing, so whatever, we shouldn't, it's not one for one, right? So if 10 rolls off, 10 rolls on, that's not the same because the rates will be higher, that we ensure that we continue reducing our debt. So I just want to say, I think this was really something significant that happened this year for the first time in many years. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So at this time, if someone wanted to make a motion regarding these items, that would be in order. Councilmember Reed.
Happy to make that motion. I move that we table the discussed items until our until the November 14th meeting for introduction.
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves that we table items SP1 through SP10 to the November 14th meeting to occur 1 week from today. Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, very quickly. I just want to reiterate and see if there's some kind of direction from the council. I would like to see our budget ordinance, in that Exhibit A that lists all of the funds go down to the department level. And so there's stronger budget controls. And so I just want to make sure that when this comes back, that maybe that's included there. And so is there interest from the council?
I don't think this is in order in a motion to table, but I'm sure that interest can be expressed very, very quickly, even perhaps by email tonight or tomorrow morning to the city manager and CFO so they have time to react to it.
I mean, just to clarify, if you look at our proposed budget, it is by each department within the fund.
No, I know. Just the budget ordinance doesn't
Even
include.
within the fund, you will see each different divisions within that, like suppose fire department, which might have 3 different business units within that, 3 different divisions. Police department, they have 7 or 8 different divisions within that. So in the proposed budget document, you would see each detail, and then within each, you would see each line item of expense and revenue.
Right. I'm going to have to bring this to a close. This is not, the motion before us is a motion to table, but this is a productive discussion that can go on bilaterally after this meeting. Will the clerk please take the roll on the motion to table these items?
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hedakaris.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries. The items are all tabled. They will be on our agenda of the regular council meeting to occur 1 week from today, November 17th, 2022. This brings us to call of the wards. Councilmember Kelly.
No report.
Councilmember Harris.
I just wanted to explain today was Oakton Community College's Spirit Day. So I was just sending a shout out to the community college, which we do pay taxes and revenue to.
Councilmember Nguyen.
No report.
Councilmember Nusma.
Fourth Ward office hours coming up this Saturday, 10 a.m. to noon at the Evanston Made Pop-Up at 832 Dempster, which is the former Lappin Computer building.
Councilmember Burns.
No report.
Councilmember Ravel.
No report.
Councilmember Reed.
Yes, the 8th Ward meeting is currently scheduled for the last Saturday of this month, and we may be rethinking that. We have monthly ward meetings the last Thursday of the month. This month is going to be Thanksgiving, so we're going to evaluate how we'll do a November ward meeting. Thank you.
Councilmember Hedakaris.
Just a reminder, 8th and 9th Ward Coffee with the Chief this Wednesday from 9 to 11 a.m. at the Levy Senior Center. I will try and stop by and say hello as well.
That concludes call of the wards. Councilmember Nusma is recognized to make a motion.
Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes 120/2, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding collective negotiation, litigation, and property. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act. These exceptions are 5 ILCS 120/2C2, 5, 6, and 11.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Newsma moves that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss the items enumerated. Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries. And at 9:19 p.m., the City Council convenes into an executive session to begin immediately in the council member library.